There's also an opening up through the move towards panpsychism within philosophy and neurosciences, the recognition that experience or consciousness or minds may not be confined to brains, but may be much more widespread in nature. Even electrons or atoms may have some degree of consciousness. And when this panpsychist approach is extended to large objects rather than very small ones like electrons, it can lead to a very different way of looking at the world. For example, if we take the view that self-organizing systems may have experience, minds, or consciousness, then the question arises, is the sun conscious? If the sun is conscious, then could the stars be conscious? If the stars are conscious, then could they be like units or cells or solar systems and stars become like cells within the body of a galaxy? Could entire galaxies be conscious? Could the Earth, Gaia, a living organism, be conscious? All these questions would completely change our view of the nature of the universe, the nature of minds. And if galaxies are conscious, why not the entire cosmos? This debate is now beginning, and I myself wrote a paper on this subject. It was the cover paper in a recent issue of the Journal of Consciousness Studies, Is the Sun Conscious? To which I answer probably yes. So that is one opening that's already beginning, a move towards panpsychism, which is another way of talking about what people in the past used to call animism. The worldview that's found in shamanic cultures and traditional religions all over the world. It was the worldview in Europe, where the official worldview in the Middle Ages was essentially a form of Christian animism, under the influence of St. Thomas Aquinas and other medieval theologians. The earth was alive, the stars were alive, they had intelligences, animals and plants were truly living beings. This was the worldview that predominated everywhere before the mechanistic revolution in science in the 17th century, which moved us onto the machine paradigm, which then was taken further by the materialist worldview in the 19th century to give the dogmas that we've been discussing in this series. Another way of recognizing pluralism in the sciences is to realize that science as a single entity doesn't really exist. Science consists of many, many, many different sciences, many different specialities in physics, chemistry, biology, geology, and many other branches of inquiry. And these sciences each look at nature at different levels. Particle physics looks at particles within atoms. Atomic physics looks at atoms. Crystallography looks at crystals. Cell biology looks at cells. Ecology looks at organisms interacting in their environments. Solar physics looks at the sun and stars. Galactic astronomy looks at the nature of galaxies. Cosmology looks at the nature of the cosmos as a whole and the gravitational fields that operate within it and the great electromagnetic fields that pervade it, and also explores the possibility of other universes beyond our own. Low-temperature physics looks at systems at very low temperatures, close to absolute zero. Chemistry looks at the structures of molecules and the interactions between them. There are many, many different branches of science, and they all have their own methods. Some use experiments, like molecular biology. Some don't, like astronomy. You can't do an experiment on a star, manipulating it to see what happens. You can only observe what happens. In geology, you can't travel back in time and modify oceans in the past to study different forms of sedimentation. You can just work with the rocks that we find on the Earth or on other planets or on the Moon as you find them. So some forms of science are highly mathematical, like particle physics. Others are hardly mathematical at all, like dragonfly taxonomy. So there are many different approaches in the sciences. What they have in common is an agreement about the importance of hypotheses, testing hypotheses, critical discussion of evidence, and empirical evidence itself. So I think it's important to recognize there's a great pluralism of levels and pluralism of sciences. The old view, the materialist or physicalist view, was that physics is the most fundamental science, and the goal of all the sciences should be to reduce everything to physics, which would then somehow give the bedrock of explanation. So psychology should be reduced to brains, brains to neurophysiology, neurophysiology to molecules and electric currents, and molecules to atoms, atoms to subatomic particles. Eventually, everything should be reduced to physics, which is, generally speaking, very mathematical, and was regarded as the epitome of the sciences. But with this multi-level pluralistic approach, there's no reason why everything has to be reduced to physics. If you're studying the physiology of blood pressure, for example, you don't need to take into account the detailed nature of quarks, subatomic particles. You look at things like heartbeat, strength of muscles in the heart, elasticity of arterial walls, etc. You're not, in practice, reducing everything to fundamental physics. So a pluralism of the sciences is actually a fact, but it helps us to recognize that there's no uniform paradigm, and there's no reason why there has to be a uniform paradigm like mechanistic materialism. Each of these sciences can investigate nature on its own terms, and of course take into account other sciences that are relevant. But there's no need for a kind of straitjacket of dogma. Another area where the sciences are opening up in a really interesting way is in consciousness studies. It's now possible within the sciences to study near-death experiences, the effects of psychedelics, mystical experiences, lucid dreaming, and a whole range of other conscious experiences. And this means that there's an overlap now between scientific studies of these phenomena and spiritual and religious phenomena, which are primarily to do with states of consciousness. Meditation, for example, is about exploring consciousness from within. And many religious traditions have contemplative sides or mystical sides, which are all about the exploration of consciousness. Tibetan monks, for example, in some traditions practice lucid dreaming, becoming aware that they're dreaming within the dream itself, because they think this will help them when they die in a post-death dream-type state, the bardo. If they've learned how to navigate dreams or a dream state consciously while they're alive, then when they're dead, and if they're trapped in a kind of dream zone, they'll be better equipped to deal with it. So there's now a large area of overlap between the sciences and spiritual practices. I discuss this overlap in 7 different areas in my book, Science and Spiritual Practices, and in 7 different areas in my book, Ways to Go Beyond, and Why They Work. And these explorations in consciousness studies also overlap with theology in different traditions. Theology is about ultimate consciousness. God is nothing if not consciousness. So if you're interested in consciousness studies and the nature of consciousness and consciousness in the natural world, in not just in brains, but in stars, in galaxies, in the cosmos as a whole, in microscopic particles, in animals and plants, then the ultimate study of consciousness is through theology. And again, a new area of discourse is opening up between consciousness studies, spiritual practices, and theology, making a bridge between the sciences and religion, which didn't exist in the era dominated by mechanistic materialism, which is essentially atheistic and dismisses all conscious experiences as nothing but the products of brains confined to the insides of heads. A new pluralist approach is also becoming apparent within integrative medicine, an approach to medicine which no longer treats mechanistic materialism, the mechanistic theory of medicine, as the only possible approach, but which can have different practices, including yoga, meditation, to help promote health and well-being, diet, fasting, alternative systems of therapy, including acupuncture, Ayurvedic practices from India, and indeed shamanic practices, including the use of ayahuasca and other psychedelics as healing modalities. Research has already shown that psychedelics like psilocybin found in magic mushrooms can help in the treatment of depression and addiction. And these kinds of psychedelics have been used in traditional cultures for many centuries, if not millennia. So integrative medicine, again, has a pluralist approach. It's not one size fits all. It's finding out what works. And as I suggested, the best way to do research in this area is through comparative effectiveness research, not based on ideology, saying these things are allowed and these are not allowed, but just simply finding out what works through comparing different treatment modalities. Another way in which the sciences can open up is through much more grassroots participation, through citizen science. So it's not just confined to professional scientists working within the career structures and bureaucracies of institutional science. This is already happening in some areas of science. The internet has enabled researchers to link up online. For example, in psychedelic research, there's a website called Erowid, and there's something called the Erowid Vaults, where people submit their own accounts of their psychedelic experiences, building up a large database of subjective accounts. And the only accounts you can have of these experiences are subjective, which makes it much easier to do research on these subjects than if researchers had to get grants and then go and interview lots of people to find out about their experiences. I already suggested when we were discussing the unexplained powers of animals that it would be possible to set up earthquake warning systems with people on mobile phones or computers reporting when they see unusual animal behavior. And it would be possible, I think it will be possible, to predict earthquakes or tsunamis much more effectively using grassroots citizen science together with modern technologies, rather than relying on seismologists who can't predict in any detail upcoming earthquakes and tsunamis.
Find out more on advire.life.